Three Browns free agents that the team should be looking to retain this offseason that may actually be a bigger need than we initially thought. All that and more coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Three free agents for the Browns this offseason that they should probably prioritize retaining. We'll get into those coming up here momentarily. Is the running back making a triumphant return this year based on some of the teams and successes that we saw this year, and why that's important to the Cleveland Browns? And then also why tight end might actually be a bigger need for the Browns than it might have seen initially. I'll explain why I think that's the case coming up here shortly. I do want to thank you for being an everyday podcast, making us your first listen each and every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Let's get after it. And like I alluded to, I've identified a couple free agents, three names in particular, that I think are going to be important for the Browns to try and prioritize bringing back next year. This list isn't exhaustive. I think, there's only so many names on this that even really makes sense in terms of guys that you should wholeheartedly feel like you need to retain. There's some other players out there, some other names out there. Maurice Hurst comes to mind, a guy who 2 seasons ago you felt really good about bringing back for this past season because, well, the defensive line was playing so well. We got to do it, right? Got to keep that group together. That was kind of the goal last year. I think this year it's kind of a different goal. I trying to largely change some things over and get some new faces in here, start a little bit fresh at some positions. But there are a few names that I think are worth exploring returning because of their contributions this past season and showing that they can certainly be members of this team in a contributing and important way. And then also, at least 2 of these names revolve kind of around just a team need, if you will. And I'll explain that here coming up. But the first one, honestly, an obvious one for you. It's a player that I've talked about before and a position that I've talked about before. It's Nick Chubb. I've been on the record already saying I think that a reunion with Nick Chubb is going to happen. It just seems too fitting from a number of fronts. He's Nick Chubb. We know how this fan base feels about him. We know how you feel about him. We know how the team feels about him. He's absolutely adored by everybody within the organization, everybody out of the organization, and they would love to have him back if it's for the right price, and that's the key thing here. But I do think that the two sides can find the right price. Nick Chubb has said he wants to finish his career in Cleveland. We know how much he loves it in Northeast Ohio, how much the fans mean to him, especially, he sort of documented that during his journey and return from the knee injury last year. And so for him, it's an opportunity to finish his career potentially where he started, or at least continue to work towards that goal of finishing his career where he started when got drafted. I don't think coming off of another season-ending knee, not knee injury, but a season-ending injury, that he's going to demand some massive price tag or cost on his contract. So it's likely an affordable situation for the Browns. Probably a 1-year prove-it deal makes sense for this upcoming season, and then kind of go from there year to year. But I just don't see that being an issue to clear. And then, like I said, because he's so adored, how do you not at least explore bringing him back? Because let's face it, a team right now that's trying to put behind them the Deshaun Watson debacle and everything that represents, having somebody like Nick Chubb around this team is the easiest PR that you can get. He's a fan favorite, somebody who's adored, like I said, within the organization and outside the organization. And he's somebody that certainly, brings some good vibes to the team. It's something that it's a guy that people love to cheer for and support. And I think the Browns need some of that right now. They need somebody who can be a positive face and representative of this organization. They have that a little bit with, obviously, not a little bit. They have a ton of that with Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, and whatever. But you could use somebody else. You could use somebody like Nick Chubb. He is as positive as you can get when it comes to this team. So I think they'll work something out. And I do think he sort of tops the list of free agents that they should be looking to retain, especially because I do think the running back position is a pretty high priority for this team right now as they look towards the future. But having Nick Chubb in that room is never going to hurt, no matter how effective he can still be at this stage of his career, which I think there's still something in there. Number 2 on the list, I'm going to the defensive side of the ball, middle of the defense, and I'm looking at Devin Bush. Now, it might be surprising to hear me say Devin Bush is a name that should be retained by the Browns. He didn't have like eye-popping numbers, and he didn't do anything that was like so, massively incredible that people would be like, obviously jumping at the opportunity to be like, yeah, we got to bring this guy back. But I do think it's important to note, I thought he had like a solid sort of bounce back year after things kind of fizzled out for him in Pittsburgh after he had the knee injury, and then he goes to Seattle for the 1 year, and then he comes here, and he's just like, I think he, as a backup linebacker, he did some nice things. He was I thought he was pretty steady in the middle of the defense, finished with 76 tackles, a sack, and a pass deflection. And I also think his role in special teams is important here because, again, you need those bodies in this locker room. You need guys that can contribute in that way. So I thought Bush, it took him some time to kind of get settled in Jim Schwartz's defense. It was a little bit of an adjustment for him, but once he got there, I think he sort of found a comfort for himself, and he was the guy sort of filling in for Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, largely towards the end of the season when we knew JOK likely wasn't coming back this season. And that's the other key component here. What does the future hold for somebody like JOK? Is he coming back? Is he going to be able to play ever again? It's a sort of scary proposition. It's an uncertainty, something that none of us are obviously excited about because JOK is a tremendous player and a tremendous person, and I love to see him out there on Sundays and all that. You don't want his career to be over, but if it reaches that scale and that stage where he potentially cannot play anymore, you need bodies in that room, and I think Bush did a solid enough job to sort of show you, yeah, we can bring him back as kind of a depth piece along those lines, and that brings us to our third guy. I'm looking at Winston Reed as another player to retain going the next season, same position, and his contributions more so though come from the special teams part of this. He is a premier. He is a special teams ringer, if you will, and an important piece of those units for the recorded 373 snaps on special teams, 144 on defense this past year as well. And he even had a few snaps on offense to sort of contribute on that front as well. But he's kind of the Swiss Army knife of a player that can do a lot of different things for you. Those players are important, especially as far as special teams are concerned, obviously. So I think, and again, the depth at the linebacker position is important, knowing that there's so much uncertainty with JOK and what his future kind of holds. So I like the idea of both of those guys being on this list of free agents that the Browns should look to retain. Yes, it's the same position, and I know that's maybe a little bit boring, but I highlighted these guys as guys that primarily should be back. I'll also say this, honorable mention maybe, tight end Jordan Akins, I think, did some solid things this year. 55 catches, 552 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was pretty solid. I don't think he's some standout linebacker, but getting into a topic I want to get to later in the show, I think tight end is an important position for the Browns to look at this offseason. So we'll get to that here in a little bit. But coming up as well, running backs seem to make a resurgence this season. I'm going to tell you why that's important for the Browns and what they're trying to do offensively next year. That is where we go next on the Locked On Browns podcast. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting this year. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets guaranteed. And that's $300 in bonus bets. Win or lose, the FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the bets keeps every game exciting. I'm a big anytime touchdown parlay builder. I almost hit on a different parlay that I put on the Lions and Commanders this past weekend during divisional weekend, and I missed it because the Lions simply didn't win the game. That's what cost me in the end of hitting on this parlay. So betting during the playoffs is so much more fun. But the beauty of FanDuel is obviously I can go try again next weekend during the conference championship game weekend. Visit FanDuel.com today to join and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So I find it interesting that if you look around the league this year and some of the teams that are left, it's kind of, I think the Eagles are maybe the poster child for this. You have an Eagles team with Saquon Barkley who got close to Eric's, single season rushing record, and was phenomenal this year. Actually helped me in one of my fantasy leagues reach the semifinals and win the regular season because he was so brilliant this year. Like, tremendous season for Saquon Barkley. It's much to the dismay of Giants fans out there. You can also find, you can pinpoint some other guys. Derrick Henry had a tremendous year for the Ravens this year, even though people didn't want to pay him. They thought he was washed. They thought he was going to break down. The Ravens took the swing, and they built this juggernaut of an offense with him being a key part of it alongside Lamar Jackson. And there you go. Just phenomenal stuff all around from him this year as well. And then I think another team I'm pointing at is the Green Bay Packers with what they did with Josh Jacobs this year. He had a great season. Another guy that I had on one of my fantasy teams this year. Like these guys had really good years. As year to year we talk about the running back position sort of diminishing and it feeling like it's a less important piece for teams to invest in, or especially invest high draft picks in, or use draft capital on. This year was kind of a step back the other direction, where it was like, oh well, maybe this is an important thing for teams to focus on. And so the reason this matters, and the reason this is an important conversation, is because as the Browns pivot back to more of that Kevin Stefanski style offense, his West Coast system, his wide zone play action offense revolves heavily around the running backs and your ability to run the football. It's why Nick Chubb was such an important part of this offense in his first 3 years here before Deshaun Watson got here, because you knew that and then that took the pressure off of some of the other guys and other players and the quarterback then made plays off of the run game. And it's what they got away from this past year. And part of the reason why the offense struggled so much, Ken Dorsey was criticized for when he was fired in Buffalo for not running the football enough. And then what do you know, that reared its ugly head here in Cleveland, where at the end of the season, they were throwing the ball 50 whatever times and running the ball very minimally. And players in the locker room talked about this idea that they got so used to passing the ball that they don't run the football well because they're not used to run blocking as much as they used to. So it's a dilemma. It's a problem. There was real issues with that. And that's why you had those same players along the offensive line in particular making comments after the season about we got to get back to our identity. We got to find our identity again. We got to do what we do best. And what they do best is running the football. That's what this unit was kind of built around, especially when Kevin Stefanski. So, I do think that there are some real tentacle. There's a real I think resurgence going on here, or a renaissance, if you will, at the running back position specifically. And so it's probably a bigger priority for a team like Cleveland than it used to be, and for some of these other teams. And part of this too, this has been talked about, this idea that at some point the evolution of the game was going to bring us back to running backs having a larger importance again. And it all has to do with the fact that these defenses have gotten smaller, they've gotten quicker. So you have these linebackers in the middle of defenses that aren't like your Ray Lewis's and Terrell Suggs and Joey Porters. Like those don't exist anymore. It's these thinner guys. It's guys that can, run sideline to sideline. They got to be able to guard tight ends and do these different things. Like it's just a different style of defense to combat the high octane passing offenses that are out. And I think that's made them more susceptible to running backs being able to make some big plays and really be a primary weapon in an offense again, rather than having to just like go to like the running back by committee thing. And some teams still do that and it works. I think the Lions are a perfect example of that. But even the Lions with their 2-back sets, like you saw the importance of those 2 running backs in that system and in that offense this year. And so I do think that it does bode well for the Browns. It's notable for the Browns because of the type of offense that they want to run. And what they kind of want to get back to with Kevin Stefanski back in sort of in charge of being the designer of this offense and what it's all going to look like. And we know Tommy Rees is going to have a role in that as the new OC, but it's Kevin Stefanski's system again. And I think that's important. Now, what this means for the Browns this offseason is I do think that there are some questions there. I said it in the first segment, like absolutely a free agent that you need to look to bring back. I don't think that I think they'll get something done and he will be back. But there are legitimate questions now about like, can Nick Chubb still be the same guy? I think there were signs of it this past season. Took him some time to sort of get his feet back underneath him, and that's understandable coming off the knee injury he was coming off of. And then by the time it felt like he was maybe starting to show he was turning the corner, that's when he breaks his foot and he's done for the year anyway. So we didn't get to really see it from Nick. We didn't get to see him kind of get back to that player that he used to be. And maybe he'll never get back to that. I think there's still something viable in there. But I also think the Browns have to sort of prepare themselves for a reality where that isn't the case. And so this year's draft class is loaded with running back talent. It is probably or arguably the deepest position group in the draft this year. This draft class maybe is weak in other areas. We know quarterback isn't really being raved about and as maybe, obviously not anywhere near what it was last year when you had such this great loaded class coming out. But there are a number of running backs that are coming out this year that I think could project really well as NFL prospects and NFL talents. Obviously, we know Ashton Genty is the belle of the ball when it comes to that group. I don't think the Browns are going to be in line to draft him because he's going to the first round. He's probably the only running back that is going to go in the first round, but he's going to the first round. I don't think the Browns are going to take a running back in the first round. I just don't. Unless maybe they trade back, get multiple picks, and then he's there somewhere where they can take him. But I just don't see that happening. I see them maybe trading back. I don't see them taking Ashton Genty because he's going to be so coveted. But even beyond that, you can get a guy in the second round of this class, third round with this class, whatever, and feel pretty good about it. Amarion Hampton with Carolina is a good player. Caleb Johnson, who I've seen plenty of, being an Ohio State guy who watches a lot of Ohio State football. He played against the Buckeyes this year. He was tremendous, obviously, this season. So I like Caleb Johnson a lot. I think he's going to be great at the next level. Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, both out of Ohio State. They haven't declared just yet. They have sort of a little extra time to do so because they played in the national championship game, obviously, this week. But I'm imagining both those guys come out. And I'll tell you this, what's funny about at least one of those guys, Quinshon Judkins, I tweeted this the other night. Quinshon Judkins reminds me a lot of Kareem Hunt. He runs angry. He runs physical. He tries to run you over. He stiff-armed a dude into oblivion the other night against Notre Dame. Like, that's the type of guy that I think Browns fans would absolutely love to see in a Browns uniform, because he went to Ohio State and he's an Ohio State legend because he won a championship there. And it's easy when he's right down I-71, but also because he reminds me a lot of Kareem Hunt. We know everybody loved Kareem Hunt, but there's some other names even further down this list as well. Corey Kiner out of Cincinnati. You got Jaquez Hunter out of Auburn, Cam Skattebo, who I like. He sort of became a living legend during the playoff because people were watching Arizona State so regularly. And that's the type of guy that I don't know that I want him as like my lead back, but that's the type of guy I know Browns fans would love. He's like a put your hard hat on, come to work type guy, bring your lunch pail. I can only imagine how much fans would eat it up if Cam Scatterby was a Cleveland Brown. So again, the names go on and on. There are some really good Khalil Mullins from Michigan, which may be sore subject, but I think he could be pretty good. Donovan Edwards as well, coming out of Michigan. Like this list of running backs is vast. And so I would say the Browns probably do look to draft a guy at some point in the draft this year. And I think it's a smart move because the urgence of running backs and a renaissance, if you will, of running backs mattering again. And that bodes well for the Browns because the type of offense they want to run, they need that. They need a good running back that can be, help them keep the down and distance short on second and third down and get back to running this Kevin Stefanski style of offense. So I will not be surprised if the Browns prioritize that in the draft this offseason and start thinking about the future there because it does feel like there's sort of a swing back to running backs matter again. Speaking of offensive positions of need, maybe a surprising one for you, but I'm going to tell you why I think tight end is actually a sneaky need for the Browns this offseason. I'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Therapy is a game changer. It can help you manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can always be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes into play. Talkspace is the leading virtual therapy provider. They make getting help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can they can match you with a license that your needs, usually within as quick as 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home or even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's even easier to prioritize your mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you can get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to get matched with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80. Is the tight end position actually a sneaky need for the Browns this offseason? I'm going to raise my hand and say yay on that because, listen, David Njoku is a guy that the fans love. Rightfully so. He's bought into Cleveland more and more ever since the trade requests and trade demands that he obviously made early on in his career. And, it's an encouraging thing to see him become sort of this Cleveland Browns icon, a player that everyone sort of rallies around and enjoys and is, excited to sort of watch every single week. But the fact of the matter is he took a step back this year in a big way. And some of that was injury related. He dealt with a number of injuries. He had the ankle early on in the season. There were some other things that flared up late in the season that kept him from being able to play. And I think that is kind of a red flag though as well. Like he's taken a beating. But even before that, like he just looked, his body didn't look right this year in terms of like, he just looked slower. He looked a step later or a step slower. He didn't look like he was as effective of a player this year. I understand there was, since he's a quarterback, he started to play better football when Jameis Winston was out there. And that's why, again, finding the right quarterback that fits this offense is going to be a key for the Browns. Because you need somebody who can run and execute Stefanski's system, and the tight end becomes such an important piece of that when it's being run effectively. But like I said, he only played in 11 games this year. The injury has certainly become a concern for a player like that who is more bigger bodied and going to take more hits and things like that as well. So I'm not saying that David Njoku's done in Cleveland. Like getting out of his contract this year is not really something that's in the cards. He comes with like a $20 million dead cap hit if you do that. Whereas next year I will say he's going into a contract year because next year he'll become an unrestricted free agent. And then there's some dead cap money associated with that because of the void years in his deal, but it's not quite as cumbersome as $20 million. So like he's on the road coming back. But I do think because of how this past season went for David Njoku and that it seems like he did take a little bit of a step. He regressed a little bit. Again, I get the inconsistent quarterback part of that. But it just felt like he wasn't he didn't look as fast to me. I think that's the other part of this. Like, he just did not look like the speed and the physicality was there. Maybe some of that was his season was derailed from the start because he had the ankle injury in week 1. And maybe he'll bounce back next year, no problem. But that still doesn't, I think it still does behoove the Browns to start planning ahead, I think, at that position, the same way that I kind of talked about them planning ahead at the running back position. So I do think it becomes something where you got to start looking ahead to what does that position look like at life without David Njoku? Because I don't know. He was a Pro Bowler last year. Maybe he gets back to that level in 2025, and you can give him an extension, have him back next year, no problem. No one's the wiser, if you will, and you keep on moving forward. But even with that in mind, I mean, he's going into his age 29 season this year. He'll be 30 the year after that. And we just know, like, once players reach that age in the NFL, it starts to be a duel with destiny, if you will, on trying to time out the right time to move off of somebody before Father Time eventually catches up with them. So this tight end class is it's not a terrible one. It's okay. Tyler Warren sort of leads the charge of this group. I don't know if the Browns are going to be in play for him or not. Again, that's one of those things where if they end up trading back, sure, maybe I could see them taking a guy like Tyler Warren. That could be a viable move for them if they trade back. If they stay where they're at 2, probably not. And so, I don't know that Tyler Warren's in play. That makes some sense. Colston Loveland out of Michigan, again, touchy subject. I get it. We're all in Ohio, but he projects to be a pretty solid player, I think, in the NFL. Gunnar Helm out of Texas, I really like. We got to see him against the Buckeyes this year. So there are some players that I think, Terrence Ferguson from Oregon, lower on the list. He's like the 8th ranked tight end. But I think in an offense where there were so many options for Dylan Gabriel, I don't know that he, put up massive numbers, but I think he could still be a player at the next level and a pretty solid one at that. So running back, tight end, as we think about the offense and going back to Stefanski's system, well, that's the other part of this too. Tight end maybe was less important in whatever offense they were trying to run, the blended offense of Kevin Stefanski and Ken Dorsey last year. That's not the case anymore. Going back to Kevin Stefanski's offense, the tight end is one of the most important positions on the field, week after week, because he likes to use, whether it's blocking, whether it's out on the pattern as wide receivers. You're going to need some depth at that position. And frankly, like, the Browns got to think about getting younger. I mentioned Jordan Akins. Like, I'm fine if they want to bring him back next year as kind of a depth piece, another guy in that room. But you still need to start getting like Harrison Bryant. He's gone. They were, the Browns were trying out Blake Whiteheart when David Njoku was injured, like guys who are just kind of these journeyman backup, depth piece tight ends. They need to start thinking about like what the future looks like at that position. And so I do think prioritizing one in the draft, where you have 9 draft picks this year, is going to be something that you see the Browns do. So running back, tight end, the big takeaways from this show become, on the offensive side of the ball, there are some skill positions, and wide receivers still up there, but I do think Jerry Jeudy has at least calmed. They still need a wide receiver. They need like a number 2 option that can take the top off, be a threat, be a compliment to him. But I think he did this past year, at least tempers like your need of, we got to go out and hit the ball out of the park when it comes to finding the next great wide receiver. Because I think they feel pretty good about Jerry Jeudy, and they should feel pretty good about Jerry Jeudy, and you should feel really good about Jerry Jeudy. So it's about finding the right complement to him. But the other skill positions, like, it's time to start thinking about like what the future looks like at those. Running back, tight end in particular. I think those are 2 massive needs that, and running back, I think, has been talked about. Tight end, maybe not so much. But that is one that is under the radar that I think we should be paying more attention to as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft, because I do envision the Browns taking a tight end at some point this year, given what they're doing offensively, what they're going back to offensively, and where David Njoku is just at in his career in general. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you, as always, for joining me to talk about your favorite football team during the off season. Well, plenty more to come in the weeks and months ahead. Tommy Reese on Thursday, so look forward to recapping and talking about some of the things that he has to say later this week. I hope you'll continue to make us your first listen every single day. For your second listen, go find a new Locked On NFL show, or if you want to keep it local, You can check out Locked On Cavs, Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer with the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon. But for now, I'm out. Talk to you later, Cleveland.